Hello, my name is Thomas Piaster and I am a teacher at the Danish Teacher Education at University College Copenhagen. And I'm trying to give you some insight into the Danish school system, and I hope you will enjoy it, though I cannot meet you face to face or even real time. You may notice this is a rather special room. This is not my office, it's not either at home. I am actually in Austria enjoying skiing, where I teach a lot of Danish ski instructors this week. So, therefore, I am unable to attend live, but I hope you can enjoy this presentation and that you will find it inspiring and hopefully compare the Danish school system to your own and find some inspiration in that. And here's the outline for the presentation. I will share some facts about the Danish school system. I will try to give a few examples of the Danish school culture. I will talk about the aims and objectives, the ideals and why and how we have schools in Denmark. And I will try to share with you the didactical trends and inspiration that has influenced the Danish school system through the last 10, 20 years, and also what's inspiring, I think, teachers here in the future. And finally, I have shared two links for further information, which is a video of an introduction to the Danish school system and also a link to the Ministry of Education in Denmark, where you find some information in English. First of all, a few facts. I suppose you know where Denmark is and also where Copenhagen is, but I'm talking, of course, of schools all over Denmark. I think it's important to just notice that Denmark is, of course, part of Europe, part of Northern Europe, and part of Scandinavia. And this is where we find lots of inspiration to the history of education in Denmark, but also to the development of education here. Of course, we look abroad, but we have a strong tradition to look to other pedagogical and didactical ideas, very much inspired from especially Germany, I would mention, but also in many ways Norway and the countries around us. If we look into the Danish school system, it is mostly important, I think, in this case to talk about the primary and the secondary education. In Denmark, pupils go to school for 10 years, as I think they do in many other countries. And you can see here from the age from usually 6 to 15, that would be what we call folkeskole, meaning the public school, and that is mandatory, marked by the red line over here. This is the kind of compulsory education we have in Denmark. After that, you can have different variations, and you may notice that we have up here the professional bachelor, we call it, which is, for instance, the teacher education, as my students are at. So, yes, if we look into it, the fact is actually that education is compulsory in Denmark, but schools are not. So all kids by the age from 6 to 15, they have the right but also the obligation to receive education. But it can take place in three different ways. Most kids would go to a primary school that is free of charge, therefore public and free for everyone. But another large group, smaller though, I will share in a second, at private schools where you have to pay in order to have your child at the school. And finally, we also see some people teaching their kids at home in homeschooling. And all three kinds of education will be followed and checked by the government. And when we compare the public schools to the private schools, you will see we have around 1,100 public schools and almost 550 private schools. But when we look at the percentage of pupils attending the schools, you will see the vast majority, they still go to the public schools, and less than 1/5, they are at the private schools. Altogether, we have more than 500,000 pupils, and I think it's fair to mention that we have had education in Denmark for more than 200 years. So the tendency of the private schools have been that they have increased in numbers through the last 10 to 20 years. And some of the reasons may be that small village schools, they have been closed down in order to create larger schools um, in the public field of schools, and therefore some parents they group and reopen local schools out in the smaller villages. Another reason and tendency could be the high standards on private schools that many expect. As you pay more, they expect you could also have higher standards at the school. And of course, there would be the free choice for the parents, and they would sometimes be inspired by either religion or ideology, or just merely an idea of that the private school is better and suits their opinions, for instance, on the didactical ways they handle the teaching and learning, and also the way they focus, for instance, on climate or things like that is what we see at different schools. So they would have a certain profile that makes them more interesting for some families. And finally, another reason that is fair to mention is that there's been, um, I suppose there are in many other countries, a challenge of regarding inclusion and having all kinds of pupils in the school. And the private schools, they tend to have fewer diagnosed and challenging pupils. And therefore, some parents, they would think it is easier and um, um, not as much disturbances and things like that in the school, and therefore they choose the private school over the public school. Finally, talking about facts, I will mention that in 2013 there was a large school reform in Denmark. And the reason for having this reform were some very poor performances in the PISA evaluations over several years. And therefore, the government had an ambition of making better performances in all subjects and supporting learning for the best performing pupils, but very much also for the lower performance that we saw in the school. And so the initiative was having longer school days, making the days from, in average, that would be a day in school from 8 o'clock for all pupils, and for the young ones till around 2 o'clock, and for the older students, they would be at the school to 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon. So longer school days for all pupils compared to earlier on. Also, inclusion was a big issue. The government wanted to include more pupils in the schools and raising the academic standards for them. So there was an idea and an ideal of having 96% of all kids in the schools, the ordinary public schools, and having them at a high level in reading, comprehension, writing, math, etc. So overall aim was support learning, and other things we saw with the school reform, especially I think due to the longer school days. Also, more physical activity was the idea to implement that in the schools, and there was some inspiration to some research conducted in especially 2011. There was a large conference in Copenhagen sort of stating the relationship between physical activity and learning, and that was also inspiration for the politicians, for them to decide that every pupil in the Danish school would have to be physically active for at least 45 minutes every day is what was decided. And finally, open school, the idea of having the pupils going outside the school, and the school to cooperate with companies, with universities and the local area in order to make the school more open to everyday life, and hoping to make it more relevant for the pupils. That was a clear ambition too through this reform. Unfortunately, that happened to be at the same time as a major conflict between the government and the teachers organization, because the government wanted the teachers to work those longer school days but not being more teachers, and therefore every teacher sort of had to teach more for the same salary and have less time to prepare and do other parts of the teacher job. And that made very tough start for the school reform, since it was related to a conflict that lasted for more than a month and was very hard on the teachers and very hard to the relationship between the teachers and the local government, so to speak. And I will now change the focus into the Danish school culture, which is often referred to as informal. For instance, we call the teachers by their first name and not their surnames, and teachers have a very friendly approach to the pupils, being easy to access and go to, and therefore we often discuss the balance between authority and respect, the kind of authority and respect needed in schools in order to conduct the lessons in a good way for all the pupils, and also sort of the balance between upbringing and education and the specific skills and knowledge that are supposed to be taught in every subject. Another very distinct feature to the culture of the Danish schools is the fact that schools and parents, and therefore also teachers, of course, are supposed to cooperate about the education of the child. It's actually stated very clearly in the legislation that they have to cooperate, bringing up and taking care of education. And the relationship between the school and the parents of the pupils is seen through the direct access to the teacher through email and the intranet, where they can communicate very easily, and many parents do that. So it's a big thing for many teachers to handle all those contacts and questions that they meet here. Also, it is very clear that parents have influence through the school board, where they are represented together with the teachers and the leaders of the school, where they can discuss the policy and actually some very specific things of how they handle the way that the school should take care of the schooling as it has been stated by the government in the local community and the school that they are part of. So they have rather much influence. I'm not sure if it is unique for the Danish school system, but still I think it's something that emphasizes the culture here. For instance, pupil participation is a big part of the Danish school system. And that means the pupils, they would have influence in quite a lot of things at the school. For instance, at a pupils board where they can discuss different things, and that is part of the educational aims that the Danish schools aim at educating the pupils into democratic citizens, where they would debate and decide different things here. I just want to share shortly this evaluation that was done together with the pupils, and here they would have some questions, and I'm just going to interpretate them for you. So the first question up here is about, are the lessons, are they dull? And green is positive, and that is less than 1/5, like 18% says no, 14% says yes, they are boring, and 68% answers that they are boring at some times. Then the other question, a bit more interesting, I guess, would be, do you often learn something exciting and interesting in school? And I was a little bit surprised that 62% says yes, very much, 33